So I want you to imagine for a second that you're holding a map.
Okay, a map.
Yeah, and it's a map of this incredibly dense, just massively complicated forest that you desperately need to navigate.
Right, your survival kind of depends on it.
Exactly. Now ask yourself, does a good map need to perfectly mirror every single tree, every moss-covered rock, every fallen leaf in that forest?
Well, no, that would just be another forest.
Right. Or does it just need to be, useful enough to help you survive the journey and actually get to the other side?
That right there is the ultimate question of utility versus representation.
It really is. And welcome, by the way, to the 7th deep dive in our ongoing philosophy series.
It's good to be here for this one.
Yeah, we're officially entering the realm of epistemology today. Basically, how do we know what we know?
Which is such a massive question.
It is. And before we can analyze specific historical thinkers or abstract concepts later in this series, we have to establish our baseline tools of reality.
We have to figure out the rules of the game before we play.
Exactly. So today's mission is this ultimate showdown. Objective truth versus relative and socially constructed truth.
It's going to get pretty wild. Because we operate under this baseline assumption that our maps, meaning our scientific theories, our moral codes, our facts are perfect, scale model photographs of reality.
We just assume there's this perfect one-to-one correlation between what's in our heads and what's out there in the physical universe.
But the moment you start pushing on that assumption, the ground beneath it just starts to crumble.
It really does. Which brings me to this image from the philosopher Richard Rorty that I've been thinking about.
Oh, the fly bottle.
Yes. Rorty compared the human search for absolute truth to an attempt to step completely outside of our own minds.
Which is impossible, obviously.
Right. He said, we are like flies trapped in a fly bottle, just buzzing around, constantly bashing our heads against the glass.
Trying to escape our own descriptions of the world.
Exactly. Trying to get out so we can finally see the, what did he call it? The undescribed sky.
The undescribed sky, yeah. Rorty has a way of painting these deeply unsettling pictures.
He really does.
Because his point is that you can never take your own glasses off. You can never step outside of your language or your historical era or your cultural biases.
Or even just your biological sensory organs, right?
Exactly. You can never view the universe from this objective God's eye view.
So Rorty's postmodern synthesis basically challenges this classical idea of the human mind as a mirror of nature.
He looks at this buzzing fly in the bottle and essentially says, well, let's just stop pretending we can encounter an objective, undescribed universe.
He suggests we should just drop the topic of objective truth entirely.
Just let it go.
But wait, if we just drop the topic, isn't that just surrendering?
It feels like it to a lot of people.
I mean, if we abandon the idea of objective truth just because our human lenses are a little smudged, we risk losing the foundation of science, of justice, basically everything we rely on to function.
That's the counter-argument, yes.
So before we can appreciate Rorty's urge to shatter that mirror of nature, I think we really need to understand how the mirror was built in the first place.
We have to look at the bedrock, how humans have defined truth for thousands of years.
Right, because to understand how truth might be a construct, we first have to look at the oldest, most intuitive definition.
The idea that truth is something entirely independent of human beings.
We're talking about the Correspondence Theory of Truth.
They're a heavy hitter. And if you trace the intellectual roots of this back, you land firmly in the ancient world.
Specifically with Aristotle, right, in his metaphysics.
Yes. Aristotle gave us this classic, seemingly bulletproof formulation. He basically said, to say of what is that it is and of what is not that it is not is true.
I mean, it sounds almost too simple, like a tautology.
It does sound incredibly simple, but it literally set the stage for 2 millennia of thought.
Wow.
Yeah, and then in the early 20th century, philosophers like Bertrand Russell formalized this into a rigorous system.
Okay, how did they define it?
They defined truth as a relational property. So think of a relationship between two completely separate things.
Okay.
A belief or a statement in your mind is true if and only if it corresponds to a mind-independent fact in the physical world.
So if I say, the coffee mug is on the table.
Right.
And if there's physically a mug resting on a table out there in the universe, my statement wins the matching game.
That matching game is the core of it. But philosophers quickly realized that matching is actually pretty complicated.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So they divided this theory into 2 slightly different approaches. First, you have object-based correspondence.
Object-based, how does that work?
This approach breaks language down into its atomic parts. The subject of your sentence refers to a specific physical object,
Okay.
and the predicate matches a property of that exact object.
Got it. So if I say the moon is spherical.
Exactly. Your subject, the moon, points to that giant rock orbiting the Earth.
And the predicate is spherical, corresponds to the actual physical geometric shape of that rock.
You nailed it. You're dissecting the sentence and mapping each piece to a piece of reality.
Okay, that makes sense. What's the alternative approach then?
The alternative is fact-based correspondence. This gained a lot of traction in the 20th century.
How is it different from the object-based one?
Well, instead of breaking the sentence into pieces and hunting for the physical referent for every single noun and adjective,
Which sounds exhausting.
it is. This approach says the whole statement matches an obtaining state of affairs.
Oh, okay, so it's more holistic.
Exactly. The entire proposition, snow is white, is true simply because it corresponds to the holistic fact in the universe that snow is white.
But hold on. If truth is always a relation, like a map in our minds trying to match a territory out there in the world, there's always going to be a gap.
Yes.
A map is never perfectly the territory. It's an approximation, right? A translation.
And translations always lose something.
Exactly.
That ontological gap, that space between thought and reality, is the fatal flaw that really bothered later philosophers.
Who are we talking about here?
Thinkers like F.H. Bradley and John McDowell. They looked at the correspondence theory and argued that if you leave any gap at all between a thought and reality, you invite skepticism.
Because you can't ever be sure the map is right.
Right. If all we have are pictures of the world in our heads, how do we ever know the picture is completely accurate?
We can't step outside our heads to check it's the fly bottle again.
Exactly. So they proposed an alternative to fix this. The identity theory of truth.
Identity, meaning they're the exact same thing.
Yes. The identity theory suggests that true propositions don't just match facts, they are the facts.
Wait, really?
Yeah. When you think truly, there is no gap. There's no translation, no map.
So the true proposition that snow is white is literally identical to the fact that snow is white.
Precisely. Reality and thought basically merge into a single entity.
Okay, that feels incredibly abstract. It's almost mystical.
It definitely pushes the boundaries of how we normally think about the brain.
Like the human mind briefly becomes the universe when it has a true thought. But here's where this entire bedrock of objective truth runs into a massive wall.
Oh, the domain problem.
Yes, let's talk about the domain problem. Because if I say the sky is blue, that clearly matches a physical fact.
You can point to the atmosphere.
Exactly. I can measure the wavelength of the light. But if I say slavery is unjust,
Right.
where is the physical particle of unjustness that I can point to? Where is the objective, mind-independent fact of morality?
That is the classic challenge. The philosopher David Hume famously divided human inquiry into two distinct domains.
Which were?
Relations of ideas, like logic and mathematics, and matters of fact, which are empirical and observable.
So the correspondence theory works beautifully for matters of fact.
Right, the mug is on the table, the sky is blue.
But if mortal claims are supposed to correspond to reality in the exact same way, we hit a brick wall.
We do, and the philosopher J.L. Mackie called this the argument from queerness.
Queerness in the sense of being bizarre or unusual.
Right, exactly in that sense. Mackie argued that if objective moral values actually existed in the physical fabric of the universe,
Yeah.
they would have to be entities of a very, very strange sort, utterly different from anything else in the cosmos.
Because they'd have to have this invisible property of, like, to be pursuedness built into them.
Not to be doneness, yeah.
Yeah.
Built right into their atomic structure.
Right. Because you can look at a wallet on a table. You can measure the leather. You can count the money inside.
You can measure the physics of a hand reaching out and taking it.
Exactly. Yeah. But you cannot put the wallet under a microscope and find the atoms of wrongness attached to it.
You can't.
The wrongness isn't a physical fact. So does the correspondence theory force us to either invent magical moral particles floating in the ether or admit that morality simply isn't true in any objective sense.
If you strictly adhere to physical correspondence, you are pushed toward a corner called moral anti-realism.
Or non-cognitivism, right?
Yes. And this is the uncomfortable idea that when someone says slavery is wrong, they aren't actually stating a fact about the universe.
They're just expressing an emotional reaction.
Exactly. It's the philosophical equivalent of saying, boo, slavery, or hooray, charity.
Oh, wow.
It's an expression of distaste, not a statement of truth.
What's the alternative then?
The alternative is that you have to broaden your definition of what a fact is to include non-physical, abstract facts.
Which probably makes strict empiricists incredibly nervous.
Very nervous because it starts to sound like magic.
Okay, so objective truth already has a massive headache when it comes to morality and abstract concepts.
A huge headache.
But let's retreat to its home turf. Let's look at science.
Ah, science, the ultimate correspondence machine.
Supposedly.
Wow.
We observe the physical world, we test it, we map our mathematical models directly onto objective reality.
That's the dream.
But if finding truth is just about matching our scientific maps to the territory, history shows we are historically unbelievably bad at it.
We are walking through the gates of what philosophers of science call the graveyard of science.
Which is such a great term. Imagine you're sitting in a cafe in late 19th century Paris.
Setting the scene.
There is this profound intellectual pessimism brewing. You have brilliant public intellectuals like Ferdinand Brunetière.
And across the continent, the Russian novelist Leo Tolstoy.
Right. And they are looking at the state of scientific progress and arguing that science is effectively bankrupt as a tool for finding absolute truth.
Tolstoy wrote quite passionately about this, actually.
What did he observe?
He observed that every single year, the scientific community produces new paradigm-shifting discoveries that astonish the world.
Sure.
And yet, a decade or a century later, those exact same astonishing truths are quietly admitted to be ridiculous mistakes.
So Tolstoy basically argued that today's cutting-edge science will be regarded by our descendants with the exact same condescending amusement as we regard alchemy.
Or the scholasticism of the Middle Ages, yes.
It's a completely history-fed pessimism.
Yeah.
I mean, if yesterday's ultimate, undeniable, objective truths are today's punchlines, why on earth should we put blind faith in today's science?
It's a fair question. Brunetière pointed back to René Descartes.
Descartes, the genius.
The total genius. He proposed that the universe was filled with these swirling invisible fluids called vortices.
Right, to explain planetary orbit.
Exactly. And it was accepted science. Then Newton came along with gravity and threw the vortices in the trash.
So Brunetière asked a terrifying question. Are our current modern laws of nature destined for that exact same oblivion?
In modern philosophy, this Parisian cafe intuition was formalized by a thinker named Larry Laudan.
Oh, the pessimistic meta-induction.
Yes. He turned it into a devastating logical argument.
Break that down for us.
Laudan looked at the historical track record and argued that the history of science is absolutely littered with theories that were highly successful.
Successful meaning they made accurate predictions.
Accurate predictions, they drove technological innovation, they solved real-world problems. But they were fundamentally entirely false regarding the deep structure of reality. The entities they claimed existed simply did not exist.
The sources provide some fantastic examples of the bodies buried in this graveyard. Let's dig a few up.
Let's do it.
Take the humoral theory of medicine. For centuries, the smartest doctors in the world believed your body was governed by 4 liquids.
The 4 biles.
Right. Blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Sickness was just an imbalance of these fluids.
So they prescribed leeches to drain blood and restore the balance.
And it wasn't just a blind guess, right? It functioned as a complete medical paradigm.
It had explanatory power for them.
Okay, what's another one?
Consider the phlogiston theory of chemistry from the 17th and 18th centuries.
Phlogiston.
Yeah. When a piece of wood burned, scientists observed that it got lighter and left behind this fragile ash.
Right.
So they theorized that all flammable materials contained an invisible, fire-like element called phlogiston.
And burning was simply the process of an object releasing its phlogiston into the air.
Exactly. It makes complete logical sense based on raw observation. The wood loses weight, so something must have left the wood.
Phlogiston.
Exactly the kind of reasoning that builds a successful theory.
But then they ran into a crisis.
A huge crisis. When you burn certain metals, they rust or oxidize, and they actually get heavier.
Wait, they get heavier.
Yeah, so the phlogiston theorists had to tie themselves in mathematical knots.
Oh, no.
They eventually proposed that phlogiston in metal had negative mass just to keep the theory alive.
Negative mass. It is wild.
Eventually, Antoine Lavoisier discovered oxygen, proved that burning is the process of bonding with oxygen rather than releasing phlogiston, and the entire paradigm collapsed.
Wow. Then you have the caloric theory of heat, right?
Yes, the idea that heat was a self-repellent fluid flowing from hot bodies to cold bodies.
And the granddaddy of them all, the luminiferous ether.
The ether.
For a long time, physics knew that light traveled in waves. But a wave is just a vibration. You can't have a wave of nothing.
A water wave needs water. A sound wave needs air.
So scientists logically deduced There must be an invisible, weightless, frictionless medium filling the entire universe that light waves vibrate through.
And they called it the ether. The brightest minds in the world dedicated their entire careers to measuring the properties of this ether.
And yet, the Michelson-Morley experiment in 1887 proved it didn't exist.
The ether was a ghost.
Just a hallucination.
Yeah. So Loudon looked at this endless graveyard of ghosts and proposed a famous ratio.
The 6-to-1 ratio.
Yes. He claimed that for every highly successful past theory we now believe refers to something real, you could find half a dozen once successful theories that were completely false.
6 dead hallucinatory theories for every living one.
Which brings in Mary Hess and her principle of no privilege.
What's her argument?
Hess argued that it is a profound cognitive bias to assume our current era is special.
Makes sense.
Every scientific system classifies the world into an ontology, a fundamental list of what entities exist in the universe.
But if you look at history, the ontologies are exactly the things that change the most radically.
Right. We throw out phlogiston and bring in oxygen. We throw out the ether and bring in space-time.
So why would we assume our current ontology, Quark's dark matter string theory, is immune to this cycle?
Exactly.
Let's just pause and let that sink in for a second. If past scientists were just as intelligent, just as rigorous as we are, and their true theories ended up in the graveyard,
Yeah.
isn't it pure arrogance to think our current textbooks won't end up buried right next to them?
It definitely feels like we're standing in a cemetery of dead concepts, clutching our shiny new physics textbook, shouting, "No, this time we got it perfect!"
It sounds like incredible hubris. But the scientific realists, the philosophers who still believe science gets us to objective truth, they didn't just take this lying down, right?
Oh, absolutely not. The graveyard of science doesn't mean objective truth is a myth. It just means we need to look closer at the corpses.
We need to analyze what actually dies and what magically survives when a massive scientific revolution happens.
This is the realist counterattack, the strategy of divide et impera.
Divide and conquer.
Exactly. Thinkers like Stathosillos and Philip Kitcher argue that Loudon's mistake was treating scientific theories as monolithic, solid blocks that live or die as a whole.
Okay, so what should we do instead?
They suggest we must dissect the theories. We have to carefully separate the idle components of past theories from the working posits.
The working posits being the core structural parts that actively fueled the theory's success.
You got it.
Wait, let me try to apply that. Let's go back to the caloric theory of heat.
Okay.
The idea that heat is a physical fluid. Engineers in the 19th century used the caloric theory to build wildly successful functioning steam engines.
They did. The trains ran. The factories pumped.
So, if the caloric fluid was a complete hallucination, how did the machines work?
They worked because of the mathematical equations describing the transfer of heat from the boiler to the piston.
The engineers had the equations right.
Exactly. The fluid itself, the caloric, was an idle component. It was just a mental picture they used to make sense of the math.
But the fluid didn't do the heavy lifting. The math did.
Right. The physical ontology was false, but the mathematical relations were true.
And this methodology goes even further with philosophers like Peter Vickers, doesn't it?
It does. Vickers argues you don't even need to definitively prove in hindsight what was essential to the success.
What do you need to do?
You just need to show that the bizarre hallucinatory parts of the theory were not essential for the empirical success back then.
Which leads us directly to one of the most elegant defenses of objective science: structural realism.
Yes, heavily championed by the French physicist Pierre Duhem and the mathematician Henri Poincaré.
Duhem drew a really brilliant, clarifying distinction between the representative part of a theory and the explanatory part.
And let me guess, you know which is which.
I think so. The explanatory part is the fluid, the ether, the phlogiston.
Precisely. The explanatory part is the underlying physical mechanism we invent to make sense of things.
And Duhem noted that these explanations are constantly shattered and discarded throughout history.
But the representative part, the pure mathematics, the raw laws, the natural classifications of data, those survived the revolutions.
Poincaré took this and called it relationism.
He did. He essentially conceded the graveyard. He said, fine, the true underlying nature of reality might be permanently hidden from us.
We might never actually know what the universe is made of.
Right. But the relations between things, how the unknown entities interact with each other, those relations are knowable and eternal.
And his crown jewel example for this was the transition in the 19th century from Augustin Jean Fresnel's optical ether theory to James Clerk Maxwell's electromagnetic field theory.
It was a brutal scientific revolution. The underlying physical ontology changed completely. The scientific community threw the physical ether into the trash.
But Fresnel had written brilliant mathematical laws describing how light reflects and refracts.
And when Maxwell built his new theory of electromagnetism, Fresnel's equations survived completely intact.
They just slotted right into the new paradigm.
Exactly. As Poincaré beautifully put it, the names changed, the mental pictures changed, but the mathematical relationships remained eternal.
But I have to push back on Poincaré here.
Go for it.
Because if structural realism says that only the mathematical relations survive, aren't we just admitting defeat?
How do you mean?
Aren't we admitting we can never actually know the nature of reality? We know the math, but not what the math is describing. It's like we have the blueprint of the house, we know the dimensions of the hallways, but we are permanently locked out and can never see what the house is actually built of. That feels incredibly hollow.
You aren't alone in feeling that way. That exact critique was leveled at Poincaré by his contemporary, the legendary physicist Ludwig Boltzmann.
What did Boltzmann say?
Boltzmann argued aggressively against these purely mathematical phenomenologists. He insisted that it's a cop-out to just retreat to math.
Because hypotheses and unobservable entities do survive theory change.
Exactly. At the time, atoms were highly controversial. Many scientists thought atoms were just useful mathematical fictions, not real physical objects.
Wow.
Yeah. But Boltzmann argued that if you just rely on equations without committing to the messy physical reality underneath them, your science stops taking risks.
It becomes a hollow heuristic rather than a search for truth.
Exactly.
So if Loudon is right that our theories are full of ghosts, and Boltzmann is right that we can't just retreat to pure math, how do we reconcile the undeniable fact that science is progressing?
We clearly are.
Right. We went from bleeding people with leeches to editing genes with CRISPR. We went from ancient sailing ships to putting rovers on Mars. We're clearly getting better.
We explain that progress using what the philosopher William Newton Smith called the animal farm move.
Borrowing the logic from George Orwell.
Yes. All theories are false, but some theories are truer than others.
Like all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others.
Exactly. This introduces a critical concept called verisimilitude, or truth-likeness.
So realists argue that we need to stop thinking of truth as a binary on or off switch.
Right. Science's increasing predictive power is best explained by the idea that our theories are getting incrementally closer to the truth.
Let me try an analogy. Imagine drawing a map of a coastline.
Okay.
In the 15th century, the map is incredibly jagged and misses entire peninsulas. In the 18th century, it's better. Today, with satellites, it's remarkably precise.
And none of the maps are the actual physical coastline.
Right, but the modern map possesses much greater verisimilitude than the ancient one.
I like the coastline analogy. Objective truth survives the graveyard, but it's battered, it's humbled.
It can only offer us approximate structural truths, and it is constantly shattered by the certainty of human error.
And honestly, this exhaustion, this constant anxiety about whether our map matches a territory we can never directly see, leads to a massive paradigm shift in philosophy.
What if we are conceptualizing truth entirely backward?
What if truth isn't a static photograph trying to reflect reality, but a dynamic living tool?
Now we are leaving Europe and crossing the Atlantic. We are pivoting to pragmatism.
Yes. And to understand this shift, we have to look at the post-Civil War era in the United States.
The Harvard Metaphysical Club in the 1870s.
Exactly. This was an informal group of brilliant, exhausted minds, including Charles Sanders Peirce and William James.
And they looked at the centuries of European philosophers endlessly debating the exact metaphysical nature of objective reality.
Arguments that never seemed to actually solve anything.
Right. And they decided the whole endeavor was practically useless. They wanted to rip truth out of the abstract heavens and connect it to human action, to sweat, to inquiry.
Peirce is the grandfather of this movement. He developed what we now call objective pragmatism.
How did he define truth?
Peirce believed that truth is inextricably linked to the physical process of scientific investigation, but he was careful.
How so?
He didn't define truth by what you or I happen to believe right now. He defined truth as the ideal limit towards which endless investigation would tend to bring scientific belief.
An ideal limit. Like an asymptote in geometry. You get closer and closer, but you only touch it at infinity.
That's a great way to visualize it. For Peirce, truth is a state of belief that is unassailable by doubt.
Imagine a global community of brilliant investigators, inquiring infinitely, running every experiment, correcting their errors over millennia.
And the final consensus that this community would inevitably reach at the hypothetical end of infinite time, that consensus is the truth.
So the reality they discover is independent of what any individual thinks today, but the concept of truth itself is defined by the ultimate end of that endless human inquiry.
It's a sweeping, almost mathematical vision.
But his good friend William James took this pragmatism, stripped the infinite math out of it, and pushed it in a much more radical, immediate direction.
Instrumentalism.
Yeah. James was less interested in a hypothetical consensus a million years from now, and much more interested in the messy, immediate present.
How do we live today?
Right. For James, truth is defined entirely by utility. He famously wrote, "True ideas are those that we can assimilate, validate, corroborate, and verify."
Truth isn't a stagnant property inherent in a sentence resting on a page. Truth happens to an idea when it works.
James basically said that the phrases, "it is useful because it is true," and "it is true because it's useful," mean the exact same thing.
Let's ground this. Pragmatism treats truth like a Swiss Army knife.
Okay.
If you are stranded in the woods, you don't care if a knife perfectly represents the Platonic ideal of knifeness. You care if it cuts the rope.
Truth is about what gets us into satisfactory relations with our raw experience.
Exactly. And then John Dewey came along and formalized James's rough edges.
Dewey focused heavily on the process of controlled inquiry, right?
He did. He actually disliked the word truth because it carried too much historical baggage. He preferred the term warranted assertability.
So for Dewey, a scientific claim is neither true nor false before it is tested in the real world.
Exactly. Truth is strictly the end product of a verified, controlled inquiry. It doesn't exist out there in the dark waiting to be found. It is forged in the furnace of problem solving.
Which brings us back to our fly bottle friend from the intro, Richard Rorty.
Rorty. In the modern era, he took these pragmatic ideas to an extreme, sometimes labeled ethnocentrism or neo-pragmatism.
Rorty argued that truth is just what our peers will, all things considered, let us get away with saying.
He said truth is just a compliment we pay to well-justified beliefs.
He essentially looks at the universe and abandons the idea of a mind-independent reality acting as a strict judge of our thoughts.
For him, justification is entirely a sociological matter.
If your community of peers accepts your statement as justified, that is all the warrant you can ever hope to have. Chasing some absolute capital T truth beyond that is a waste of breath.
But here's where my alarm bells start ringing. I want to push back hard on James and Rorty here.
Let's hear it.
If truth is just what works or what pays to pursue, doesn't this entirely destroy the concept of a fact?
Oh, interesting.
Let's use a modern example, the placebo effect.
Okay.
If someone is sick and I give them a sugar pill but tell them it's powerful medicine and they take it and their belief actually cures their illness, that sugar pill had immense utility.
It worked perfectly.
Right. So does the comforting delusion that the pill contained medicine become true just because it healed them?
That is the most potent and consistent objection to pragmatism. Critics argue that pragmatism fatally conflates truth with justification.
It makes truth too subjective, too deeply dependent on our contingent, flawed ability to figure things out.
If a community collectively decides that the earth is flat, and that belief unifies them socially, prevents political civil war, and brings them happiness, it has incredible utility for them.
But the earth remains an oblate spheroid.
Exactly. If truth is just what works, then truth changes wildly depending on who is doing the working and what their goals are.
A comforting lie can be incredibly useful.
And that concern about comfort and delusions and subjective utility cracks the door open to our next massive paradigm.
If truth is heavily based on human inquiry and human utility, then truth must vary because human beings vary.
Welcome to the world of relativism.
Let's trace the roots of this. We go back to ancient Greece, to the sophist Protagoras.
He is the one who famously declared, "Man is the measure of all things."
A statement that sent Socrates into an absolute rage. But to understand relativism today, we must make a very clear distinction between descriptive relativism and normative, or alethic, relativism.
Let's break those down. Descriptive relativism isn't really controversial, right? It's basically an anthropological observation.
Yes, descriptive relativism just notes the obvious empirical fact that different cultures across the globe have wildly different beliefs, moral norms, and explanatory frameworks.
One culture uses the scientific method to explain disease. Another culture relies on spiritual imbalances or witchcraft.
One society embraces polygamy, another strictly enforces monogamy. It's just anthropologists cataloging the diverse tapestry of human thought.
Nobody really debates that cultures believe different things. The philosophical bombshell is the second kind, normative, or alethic relativism.
Alethic relativism, stemming from the Greek word aletheia, meaning truth, makes a much bolder philosophical claim.
What does it claim?
It asserts that truth itself is relative to a framework, a language, or a culture. It claims that the phrase is true is not a one-place predicate.
Meaning you should never just say X is true. You should always say X is true for Y.
Exactly. So under this framework, if you are standing in London and say it's raining, and I am standing in Tokyo and say it's not raining, we are both completely right relative to our framework.
Alethic relativists take that basic geographical logic and apply it to everything. To morality, to history, to scientific facts.
They apply time zones and zip codes to reality.
And we see this perspective manifest in fascinating ways across global philosophy, not just in the West.
Like constructive relativism.
Right. For instance, the Sri Lankan philosopher Nalin de Silva developed a framework arguing that grasping a mind-independent reality is structurally impossible.
And that all human knowledge is ultimately rooted in avidya, a Sanskrit concept meaning ignorance.
Our knowledge is fundamentally constrained by our sensory organs and our cultural upbringing.
The sources also mention Madhyamaka Buddhism and its two truths doctrine.
Yes, which adds another layer. In that tradition, there is the relative, conventional truth, the practical truths of our daily experience, language, and culture.
And then there's the ultimate truth of sunyata, or emptiness, which is a reality free from all our dualistic human categories.
But when we look at the modern Western tradition, the architect of how relative truth interacts with society is Michel Foucault.
If we are talking about relative truth, we have to talk about power. Foucault completely upends the landscape.
For him, truth isn't some pristine artifact hidden in the fabric of the universe waiting to be discovered by a noble, objective scientist.
Truth is produced. It is manufactured by societal constraints, and its primary function is to induce and maintain regular effects of power.
He introduced the concept of the regimes of truth. Let's unpack that.
Foucault argued there is a general politics of truth. Every society, in every era, decides which types of discourse function as true.
Societies create the massive mechanisms to distinguish the true from the false.
Think of the modern university system, scientific peer review boards, or in older times, religious councils.
A society decides the status of the people who are charged with saying what counts as true.
Right. An astronomer has the status to declare truths about the stars. An astrologer does not.
So the battle for truth, in Foucault's eyes, isn't a noble quest to find the ultimate reality. It's a brutal institutional battle over the rules and the power.
Exactly.
But here's what trips me up. Does Foucault's view mean science is just politics wearing a lab coat?
That's the criticism.
I mean, is the DSM, the psychiatric manual that classifies mental illnesses, or the peer review system in physics, just an architecture of power deciding what gets to wear the badge of a fact? Because gravity pulls you down whether you have institutional power or not.
Foucault wouldn't deny that a rock falls when you top it, but he would say that the grand scientific discourses around gravity, the institutions that fund the research, the educational systems that teach it, all of that is inextricably bound up with power.
You cannot separate the scientific truth from the societal machinery that validates it.
Right. What is considered a psychiatric truth in 1950, for example, looks very different than in 2020, largely due to shifts in social power and institutional authority.
That makes sense when applied to human institutions. But alethic relativism, the idea that all truth is relative, runs headfirst into a massive, unavoidable, logical brick wall.
The self-refuting critique. It's the oldest trap in philosophy.
If a relativist looks at you and claims, all truth is relative, you simply have to ask them one question.
Is that statement relative?
Checkmate.
Yep. If they say yes, that statement is only relatively true, then it doesn't apply to everyone, meaning objective absolute truth can still exist for some people.
But if they say, no, the statement all truth is relative is an absolute truth, they have just admitted that at least one absolute truth exists, blowing up their entire philosophy.
Beyond a logic puzzle, there is a very practical, lived critique. The sources mention the Belgian philosopher Martin Boudry.
He highlights a phenomenon he calls occasional relativism.
Occasional relativism, like being a vegetarian only on the weekends.
A great comparison. Boudry points out that people generally only deploy relativism as a convenient rhetorical weapon.
Usually in academic debates, sociology seminars, or cultural politics.
But the moment the stakes of their physical reality become real, they instantly abandon it.
A staunch cultural relativist who writes papers claiming Western science is just one arbitrary narrative among many doesn't seek out a shaman when they need a colonoscopy. They go to a specialized oncologist.
They don't apply relativism to the laws of fluid dynamics when they are boarding a Boeing 747 at 30,000 feet.
You can be a relativist in the philosophy lounge, but everyone becomes a strict, objective realist when they are standing on the edge of a steep cliff.
Which demonstrates that while relativism is incredibly useful for highlighting cultural contexts and power dynamics, the extreme claim that truth itself is entirely boundless and subjective fails the most basic tests of lived reality.
But the insights of relativism open the door to a concept that is even more radical, and frankly, more popular today.
We don't just interpret a static reality differently based on our culture. What if our culture actively builds the reality?
We are diving into social constructionism.
Social constructionism takes the sociological observations of relativism and applies them directly to the fabric of our world.
Starting in the mid-20th century with sociologists like Peter Berger and Thomas Luckman, the core idea is that many phenomena we assume are purely natural or inevitable are actually collectively formulated, built, and sustained by social contexts.
Let's give some concrete examples to ground this. Money is a social construct.
A $100 bill is just a piece of paper made of cotton and linen. It has zero intrinsic value in the physical universe.
It only has power because we as a society collectively hallucinate its value and agree to enforce it.
Citizenship is a construct. The modern 7-day week is a construct. We built them.
That is the baseline. But philosophers make a crucial, often misunderstood distinction here between the construction of representations and the construction of facts.
Let's say a physicist formulates a mathematical theory about a quark.
The theory, the representation, the equations written on the chalkboard is absolutely socially constructed.
It was built by human scientists in a specific historical era using a specific culturally developed language.
But does that mean the quark itself, the physical fact bouncing around in a particle accelerator, is socially constructed?
That is the dividing line. The philosopher John Searle explores this with the concept of constitutive construction.
He uses the brilliant example of a cocktail party.
A cocktail party only exists because human beings collectively intend for it to be a cocktail party. It has no physical, mind-independent analog in the universe.
If all humans disappear tomorrow, the cocktail parties disappear instantly.
But the quarks do not. The quarks keep spinning.
This gets even deeper and a bit blurrier when we look at linguistic relativity, famously associated with the linguist Edward Sapir.
He argued that the real world is to a large extent unconsciously built up on the language habits of the group.
Sapir, and later Benjamin Lee Horff, observed that no two languages represent the same social reality. The vocabulary we have shapes what we can perceive.
If your language has 50 distinct words for different types of snow, your brain literally perceives the winter landscape differently than someone whose language only has one word for snow.
Because language constructs our perceptual categories, different societies essentially inhabit distinct worlds.
Okay, I follow that language filters our perception. But how far down the rabbit hole does this construction go?
This brings us to the philosopher Ian Hacking and his brilliant book, The Social Construction of What?
He tries to referee this massive fight between the realists and the constructivists, and he breaks the debate down into 3 specific sticking points.
Hacking is essential here. The first sticking point he identifies is contingency.
To understand this, ask yourself, could our physics have developed entirely differently?
For a strict scientific realist, human physics was inevitable because it simply maps onto reality as it is. The universe dictated the science.
For a strong social constructivist, our physics is highly contingent.
Let's run a thought experiment here. Imagine an alien civilization visits Earth. They are wildly technologically advanced. They have faster than light travel.
The realist says, well, their physics textbooks must look exactly like ours. They must have discovered quarks and electrons because there is only one universe.
But the constructivist argues no, their physics could be built on fundamentally different concepts, entirely non-quarky paradigms, and still work perfectly.
The second sticking point Hacking identifies is nominalism. This deals with the names we give things.
So the labels we invent actually map onto natural joints in the universe.
Does the universe come pre-categorized into neat little boxes, or is the universe a messy, continuous spectrum, and humans just arbitrarily slap labels on it to make it manageable?
The constellation analogy works perfectly here. The stars in the sky are objectively there in the vacuum of space. But the Big Dipper is entirely a social construct.
The universe didn't draw a cosmic line between those specific 7 stars. We drew the lines based on our cultural mythology.
Nominalism asks, is everything we name just a Big Dipper?
And the third sticking point is stability. Why is scientific knowledge so stable? Why do we all agree on the laws of thermodynamics?
The realist says, because scientists finally got it right and found the absolute truth.
The constructivist says it's stable because of massive social networks, institutionalization, peer pressure, and billions of dollars in funding enforcing the paradigm.
To help clear up this mess, hacking makes a genius distinction between two types of categories, indifferent kinds and interactive kinds.
This distinction is the key to understanding exactly where social construction is most powerful. An indifferent kind is something like a rock, or a plutonium atom, or a dinosaur bone.
The rock does not care what we call it. Our social labels do not change the internal physical behavior of the plutonium.
It is entirely indifferent to our sociology.
But human traits like mental illness categories, or gender roles, or social class are interactive kinds. This is where things get wild.
When a society creates a classification like introvert, the people classified actually interact with the label.
If I'm diagnosed as an introvert, I might read about introversion, internalize the traits, and start behaving more like an introvert.
My behavior changes the definition of the label, which then feeds back into society. It's a continuous looping effect.
Social construction is an incredibly powerful, undeniable lens when dealing with interactive human kinds. But strong constructionists sometimes get overzealous.
They try to push this sociological lens too far into the natural world, which triggers a massive naturalistic pushback.
Let's talk about the pushback. Contrast global constructionism with naturalism. The philosopher Jerry Fodor used a devastatingly simple example from psychology.
The Mueller-Lyer illusion.
For anyone who hasn't seen it, it's that classic optical illusion with two horizontal lines. One line has arrows on the ends pointing outward, the other has arrows pointing inward.
Even though the two horizontal lines are the exact same physical length, the one with the inward pointing arrows always looks longer to the human eye.
Fodor points out something profound about this. You can take a ruler and measure the lines. Your cultural knowledge, your scientific theory, your conscious beliefs all tell you with 100% certainty that the lines are equal.
But your perception still sees them as different. No matter how much I socially construct the truth of their equality in my mind, my eyes refuse to comply.
Which proves definitively that some of our cognitive processes are what Fodor calls informationally encapsulated.
They are hardwired by evolutionary biology and are entirely immune to our social constructions, our cultures, or our beliefs. We cannot socially construct our way out of basic biology.
And this leads to my favorite critique of extreme constructionism, specifically regarding backward causation.
Oh, this is a great one.
Some extreme thinkers in the science studies field, like Bruno Latour in his early career, flirted with the idea that scientific facts literally do not exist until the scientific consensus creates them.
Which leads to a severe logical paradox when dealing with history.
Right. The physicist Paul Boghossian absolutely tears this apart. He points out that if the anatomy of a dinosaur is just a social construct that was created by the consensus of 20th century paleontologists,
It implies literal backward causation.
it implies that scientists in 1920 magically caused physical facts about the Jurassic period to spring into existence 150 million years in the past. Isn't that utterly absurd?
It is absurd if you take it as literal physics. It confuses the construction of our concept of the dinosaur with the creation of the physical animal.
The bones were in the dirt for millions of years. Our concept of the dinosaur was built in 1920.
Exactly. So look at where we are. We have swung like a massive pendulum.
We started with the rigid absolute mirror of objective truth, which we found is cracked by human bias and haunted by the graveyard of dead science.
Then we swung to the extreme, shape-shifting fluidity of social construction, which explains human culture beautifully, but completely fails to explain the reality of airplanes, gravity, and dinosaur bones.
Both have fatal flaws. We need a way to reconcile the two. Is there a philosophical framework that respects the hard physical reality of the universe while fully acknowledging the biased, constructed nature of human perspective?
There is. And it serves as the grand synthesis for our deep dive today. It is called critical realism, primarily developed by the philosopher Roy Bhaskar in the 1970s.
Bhaskar set out to cure a disease in philosophy that he called the epistemic fallacy.
The epistemic fallacy is a fundamental mistake. It is the error of confusing what actually exists in the universe, which is ontology, with what human beings can possibly know about it, which is epistemology.
Bhaskar argued that reality is incredibly complex, stable, and completely independent of us. But human knowledge is messy, dynamic, fallible, and heavily socially constructed.
If you smash the reality and the knowledge together into one concept, you get chaos. You must keep them distinct.
To untangle this mess, Bhaskar slices reality into three distinct layers. Let's walk through them.
Layer one is the real. This is the absolute totality of existence. It includes all the underlying unobservable causal mechanisms, the laws of physics, the deep forces that make the universe tick.
The real exists completely independently of human awareness or scientific measurement.
Layer two is the actual. These are the physical events and occurrences that are generated by the mechanisms of the real.
When a massive tree falls in a deserted forest, the physical falling of the wood is the actual event. It happens, the air vibrates, the ground shakes, regardless of whether a human is standing there to observe it.
And finally, layer three is the empirical. This is the domain of subjective human experience. It is what we actually perceive, what we can measure with our tools, what we write down in our textbooks.
The empirical is highly fallible, constrained by our evolutionary biology, our faulty instruments, and our social constructions.
I love visualizing this. Think of the ocean.
Okay.
The real is the deep, unseen ocean currents, powered by gravity, temperature gradients, and the rotation of the Earth. Those currents are always there, churning in the dark.
The actual represents the specific waves crashing onto the shore,
Yeah.
generated by the energy of those deep currents.
And the empirical, that is us, standing barefoot on the beach, getting our feet wet. We can only feel the cold water splashing against our toes. That is our limited, subjective, constructed experience.
We can never dive deep enough to see the global currents all at once. But by studying exactly how the water hits our feet, by building better instruments, we can deduce the existence of the deep currents.
That is a phenomenal encapsulation of Bhaskar's thought. Critical realism looks at this layered ocean and acknowledges that human constructs our language, our scientific models, our names for things, are not perfect, flawless mirrors of nature.
But they are also not arbitrary fictions. They are, in Bhaskar's terms, distillations of the real.
The sources offer a wonderfully simple example of this distillation: a person's name. A name is a 100% socially constructed artifact. It is just a sound we invented. It only exists in the collective human mind.
Yet that completely constructed name is absolutely essential for pointing to a real identity and for deciphering social reality. Without it, you can't navigate the world.
So critical realism gives us hope. It argues that it is entirely possible to pursue objective truth using fallible, constructed means.
Yes, our language and our scientific paradigms are socially constructed lenses. They are built by humans with biases and funding models. But they are lenses focused on an independent, uncompromising reality.
It is a breathtaking synthesis. It lets us keep our objective universe, the quarks, the dinosaurs, the deep ocean currents, while fully admitting that the scientific, cultural, and linguistic lenses we use to look at them are socially constructed and historically fragile.
We don't have to choose between the cold equations of physics and the warm insights of sociology. We just have to put them in their proper layers.
It provides a stereoscopic vision of reality. You look at the mind-independent world of physics and nature with one eye, and you look at the socially constructed, power-laden nature of human knowledge with the other.
When you open both eyes together, you finally get depth perception.
What an incredible place to land. Let's do a quick flyover of this territory. We started at the bedrock with Aristotle's objective correspondence, the mind trying to perfectly mirror the universe.
We then walked through the haunted graveyard of scientific theories, realizing that our mirror is frequently cracked.
We swung across the Atlantic to embrace the pragmatic utility of truth, where truth becomes a Swiss Army knife that works for us in the moment.
We navigated the treacherous power dynamics of Foucault's relativism and the dizzying backward causation of extreme social construction.
And finally, we landed on the balanced, three-tiered vision of critical realism.
And the reason this epistemology toolkit matters for anyone navigating the world today is profound. As you progress through the rest of this philosophical series, or frankly, as you just scroll through the chaotic debates on your daily newsfeed, you now possess the conceptual vocabulary to dissect exactly what is happening.
When a politician or a scientist makes a claim, you can identify it. Are they claiming absolute objective reality? Are they arguing for pragmatic utility, meaning this is just what's best for society right now?
Or are they actively trying to expose a socially constructed regime of power? You can spot the epistemic fallacy out in the wild.
You are no longer just a passive consumer of facts. You can see the layers of the ocean.
But I want to leave you with one final lingering thought to chew on before we wrap up this deep dive. We talked extensively about that third layer, the empirical, our human perception. We noted that it is heavily constrained by our cognitive biases.
Now, evolutionary biology tells us that these human cognitive biases did not evolve to do advanced calculus or perceive quantum fields. Our brains evolved for rapid, low-energy survival on the African savanna.
Recognizing the shape of a predator in the tall grass instantly is far more important for passing on your genes than accurately calculating the exact atomic mass of the grass.
Exactly. Evolution favors speed and survival over objective truth.
So if our cognitive lenses evolve specifically to filter reality for survival rather than for perfect accuracy, is it possible that seeing the ultimate objective truth of the universe would actually be a biological disadvantage?
Could our very survival depend on reality remaining partially socially constructed, simplified, and subjectively filtered?
If we didn't have our constructed, simplified maps, would the raw, unfiltered, buzzing territory of the universe simply overwhelm our brains?
It's entirely possible.
So the next time you are holding a map, whether it's a literal map on your phone, a scientific theory you're studying, or a deeply held moral belief, remember, it might not mirror the universe perfectly.
Yeah.
It probably has some ghosts in it.
But maybe, just maybe, it's drawn exactly the way you need it to be to survive the journey.
Think about that until our next deep dive.